Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My WhatsApp group, this um, photo of Steve Biko has been taking the rounds. And in it is a quotation from his book, I Write What I Like. And he's basically asking a fundamental question, simple but fundamental, which is what is the character of a defeated race? And in his book, he goes on to say a number of things, including a race that brags about expensive clothes that they wear that are produced by another race, that brags about the car they drive when the car is also produced by another race, etc., etc. Yes, it's got a point. I think one of the greatest failures of blacks as a race is a failure to make to do something with our own lives. We seem to be content with playing the supportive role in this world, in this life. I can understand Steve Biko's frustration. But if Steve Biko was alive today, what would he say about South Africa, about independent Africa? I think he'll be very disappointed. He will be really disappointed. Here we are. We are now an independent country. The challenge is, can we govern ourselves? Look at what has happened since the end of apartheid in South Africa 30 years ago. South Africa was one of the, if not the most industrialized country in Africa in 1994. And yet, 30 years later, it hasn't got there yet, but it's getting there. It's becoming a failed state, another African failed state. 30 years of gross mismanagement, of rampant corruption, have left many South Africans sitting by, waiting for the day when they will have a meaningful share of the wealth of that country. You look at countries like Zimbabwe, it's even worse. Zimbabwe, when we got independent, we're an upper middle income country. In 40 years of ZANU-PF gross mismanagement and rampant corruption, the country is now considered to be a low income country. Half the population in Zimbabwe are living in abject poverty. The criminal waste of the resources in Zimbabwe is heartbreaking. The country's basic healthcare services like healthcare and education have been neglected for decades. They're in a deplorable state. when you find that even the main referral hospitals are in such a sorry state that it is quite common for them to cancel any operations because they don't even have something as basic as painkillers. They run out of water. You hear stories of people who come to hospital with serious injuries like burns, and the nursing staff will tell you that we do not have bandages. So sometimes we take off the bandage, go and wash it, and come and try to reuse it because what else can you do? And yet the country is spending billions of dollars every year on expensive trinkets, imported expensive trinkets, toys. Nangagwa and his ministers, they've got posh cars, a fleet of them, parked outside their homes. They live in mansions comparable to Hollywood stars. That is a defeated government. Bragging about expensive clothes, cars, and other trinkets that they use, produce somewhere else, while the rest of the populace is denied even the basic requirements of life. The one thing that Steve Biko, I think, would be very proud of is that South Africa, unlike most other African countries, has managed to hold free, fair, and credible elections consistently. I think what you would have wanted to see South Africa do is not only deliver on the front of political rights, but also deliver on the economic prosperity. The country has got that potential to hold its own and still remain an upper middle income country. I said earlier on, South Africa is an upper middle income country, but has been slowly sliding off that perch. Yes, there are still a lot of South Africans who are incredibly rich, but there are also a lot of South Africans who have slipped into abject poverty, all because of 30 years of gross mismanagement and rampant corruption by ANC. The challenges of delivering on the economic front, I think, are not insurmountable. I think the likes of Steve Biko would have been pragmatic enough to say, let's adapt the system that will deliver economic prosperity to our people. That should be our source of pride, not some of the empty rhetoric that some of the African nationalists in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, and many other African countries have been trying to spoon feed the populace. Some of the pro anti white rhetoric is manufactured to justify their failures. Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF, has failed to deliver on the political front. It has failed to deliver free, fair, and credible elections. And on the economic front, it failed to deliver economic prosperity. And when you can rig elections, you can get away with coming up with all manner of scapegoats. And the white, the Western imperialists have been a ready-made scapegoat. Yet, ironically, which is one of the things that Steve Biko was trying to emphasize there, the same regime that will be frothing 1 minute about anti-whites, anti-Westerners, and so forth, is the one, after the long speech at a rally denouncing the West, will be getting on the plane to go and do their shopping in London or Paris or New York. Indeed, they'll be leaving the rally in a Mercedes-Benz limousine manufactured in the same in this very country that they were denouncing. The irony is, the pity is that the people themselves are so gullible that they believed all those lies. I wonder what Steve Biko would have said about the way forward for South Africa today. There's been a lot of debate on it. For those hardcore black nationalists, the idea of a coalition with DA has been unthinkable. I would like to think that the likes of Steve Biko was pragmatic enough to say it is not DA that they're making a coalition with. It's what is good for South Africa. DA definitely brings into the South African government what ANC has lacked these last 30 years. And that is competent management of the economy and stamping out corruption. Just because DA has got whites in the party, it would be foolish to dismiss it, be cutting your own nose to spite your own face, to dismiss it on the grounds that, oh, we don't want anything to do with whites. I'm just showing there at the bottom what Steve Biko was offering as a solution during his time when he was asking what is the characteristic of a defeated race. According to him, he said the first step, therefore, is to make the black man come to himself, to pump back life into his empty shell, to infuse him with the pride and dignity, to remind him of the complicity in the crime of allowing himself to be misused and therefore letting evil reign supreme in the country of his birth. I believe Steve Biko was pragmatic enough to see that the pride comes out of success. And to refuse to accept success on the grounds that it's associated with the whites, with another race, is the kind of lack of vision that has affected most of our people in Africa. When you talk to some of the ZANU-PF hardcore supporters, they even have been brainwashed to believe that rigging elections is punishing the whites. Of course, it's nonsense. How are you punishing the whites? By denying your own people their dignity. You even hear some of the ZANU-PF leaders claiming that they are not going to hold free, fair, and credible elections until sanctions are lifted, for example. Again, that's nonsense. What has got sanctions imposed by the West on ZANU-PF leaders to do with the ordinary person in the rural backwaters? Why should he or she be denied their fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country because the West imposed sanctions on ZANU-PF? It's nonsense. This is like somebody having a fight at his workplace or in the beer hall, coming home and beating up the wife and the children. What have they got to do with it? Just because he can beat them up doesn't mean he has got the right to beat them up. Just because ZANU-PF is able to rig the elections doesn't mean that it is right for ZANU-PF to rig elections. I think one of the most disappointing things in Zimbabwe, and every Zimbabwean, every thinking Zimbabwean out there should be ashamed of, is that 44 years after independence, we still are failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections. 44 years. In this day and age, well, if that is not a sign of a defeated race, I don't know what is. We in Zimbabwe, we are a defeated people. We don't even have the common sense to stand up, the courage to admit to ourselves that the present political system is not working. We want to convince ourselves that it is working. Chamisa conned millions of people last year to participate in flawed elections, which they were warned They will only give ZANU-PF legitimacy. But still, they participated. How anyone could believe some of the outrageous promises Chamisa was offering is just beggars belief. Beggars belief. In this day and age, you still believe that Chamisa has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Biggest challenge for Zimbabwe is to make sure that we do not have another rigged election come 2028. But at the present moment, the signs are we will. We are going down that route. ZANU-PF is definitely not, has no intention of implementing any democratic reforms. The opposition, Triple C, such as it is just content with sharing this huge gravy train seats that it won. They're busy fighting among themselves. They're not going to implement any reforms. Chamisa the other day was claiming that he is going to fix ZEC because ZEC is not fit for purpose. How is he going to fix it? He had the golden opportunity to implement reforms during the GNU. He failed to implement even one reform. MDC had the majority in parliament then, and they were in government in the GNU. They had the backing of SADC as the guarantor of the global political agreement. Now, SADC has nothing to do with Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF, thanks to Savango's recall of the few Triple C elected officials, ZANU-PF has got now the supermajority in parliament. Chamisa himself has no political party, and yet he claims that he's going to get ZANU-PF to reform ZEC. And worst of all, the usual suspects believed it. They believe it. And they therefore then would participate in 2028, convinced that Chamisa has reformed ZEC. So we end up with 48 years after elections, after independence, we're still failing to hold free, fair, and credible elections. This is not a defeated nation. I don't know what is. I really don't know what is. We can't even govern ourselves. We can't even define what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. How tragic. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.